Yay.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Becky Robinson, and I am so thrilled to be here today with CrisMarie Campbell and Susan Clarke as we dive into the beauty of conflict for teams. Welcome, CrisMarie and Susan.
Oh, we are thrilled to be here with you.
Yeah. Exciting.
Wonderful. Well, as everyone is coming in, I want to take a moment or two to orient you to the Zoom webinar platform. Chances are you have joined us on a webinar before, or now that it's the COVID crisis, you've likely used Zoom before. But one of the things I want to let you know is that we will be using the chat feature throughout today's event. And so I want to invite you at this point to find the chat. And when you do so, we would request that you use the drop-down menu to select all panelists and attendees. That way you can interact with others on today's call. They can see your comments and questions, and we find that the chat is a great place to engage with one another in the learning. So welcome to Stephen, and welcome to those of you who are going to type in the chat just any minute now. As I often do, I will invite you to tell us where you're calling in from. It's always fun to see the variety of spots. I know that CrisMarie and Susan have called in from their home in Montana. I'm in my home in Michigan, so welcome. Wow, now these are coming in so fast. So welcome in Durham, North Carolina, and Chicago, and Ireland.
Wow.
Yeah, an international audience today. Let's see. Daryl's in Charlotte. We've got someone in Columbia, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kansas. Hi, Erica, my friend who comes every day, and Kristen in Colombia. We have a caller from Munich, Germany, New York City, Southern California, Vancouver, British Columbia, Spain. So Trinidad and Tobago, if I'm saying that correctly. So certainly we have an international audience today, and I imagine it's because all of us need to learn how to deal with conflict at times like these.
Yes, that's for sure. Yes.
So a couple of other notes. We are recording today, so you will be able to watch this later so that you can revisit the ideas or share them with a friend or colleague. Additionally, and I haven't actually asked CrisMarie and Susan, but we will often send a PDF of the slides, so you don't have to worry about scribbling these down. We'll make sure that you get the slides as a PDF later. And wow, we have someone from Kazakhstan.
Wow.
Okay.
So welcome in Kazakhstan. And I don't know if I can go along with Go Bucks from our friend Lindsay in Columbus, Ohio. I happen to be a University of Michigan fan, Lindsay, so we can still be friends, I promise. It's all good. It's all good. I like Ohio too. So there's some conflict right there, right?
There you go. Right now, we all just want to see that at some point these
Teams get to
play again.
Again, yeah, no kidding. That is so true. Okay, so we want to get straight into the content, but before we do that, I want to introduce you to my friends and clients, CrisMarie and Susan Campbell. So they are the founders of Thrive, which is a coaching and consulting firm that specializes in helping individuals, leaders, teams, and entire companies learn how to deal with differences in order to ignite creativity and innovation. And they have this amazing step-by-step proven model, and we're going to dive into that model today. And it's a process they've honed working with hundreds of leaders and their teams over 25 years. And some clients that they've worked with in the past include Johnson & Johnson, Microsoft, AT&T, Nationwide, and other organizations like the Gates Foundation. And one of the things about CrisMarie and Susan is that their work's been featured all over. If you haven't seen it, you can check out great features of them on the Today Show, NBC, HR Daily Advisor, and Small Business Trends. So partners in work and life with a ton of value to offer to us today. So let's dive in.
Excellent.
Okay, cool.
Thank you, Becky. This is so exciting with all this international audience. I'm CrisMarie.
I'm Susan.
And we will dive in.
Yes.
Today, what we're going to cover is why we think increasing your capacity for learning to deal with uncertainty is the #1 skill for 2020 all over the globe.
Yeah.
And the power of moving from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And also skills for
and to be clear, the power of learning to move between a fixed and growth mindset. So we'll come to that as we go.
And skills for having tough conversations successfully. And I just want to say, for me, and conflict just to give you a little context, I did not grow up thinking, ooh, I love conflict. In fact, I grew up with a dad who was like hard. He was an Army colonel. He was angry. So I was terrified of conflict. And I learned to please and achieve in order to keep things smooth. And that was my skill set. It became a superpower for me, but it eventually became a career limiting move as I moved up into, I was a manager at Arthur Andersen. And because I didn't speak up, I got blamed for a project failing because I knew it wasn't going to succeed. But did I say that? No. So I really wanted to learn how to deal with conflict. And I met Susan, who dealt with conflict, and I thought, I got to figure out how to make this happen. So I just want to give everybody, we're not like, conflict, yay! It's acquired taste.
And just so you know, I'm not a conflict yay either. However, I do believe that really surfacing conflict seriously saved my life. If it hadn't have been for the willingness to engage in that, I've had 4 different cancers, and that process alone taught me many things about having to work with a variety of different experts, and who really often did not like to talk to each other, from traditional medicine to non-traditional medicine. And so I had a lot of work to do to say, hey, I want your skill set, and I need you guys to actually dive into this conflict. And not only was it happening with my outside of me, with my various medical experiences, but had also unearthed and cracked into something that hugely divided my family, my community, and everything else. And at one point it was, I remember someone saying, you'd be better off dead. And I was like, wow, I think I'd be better off dealing with this conflict. Mm-hmm. And it became something that changed and altered my life. And I became very passionate about helping people understand that it may be painful, but it's worth it to figure out how to do this differently than just avoiding it or transcending it. So yeah.
And we've worked together for a long time, and we really specialize in the team environment, because that's where relationships, hopefully you have a sense of connection, you can develop the trust and show up with your real opinion so that you get to innovative and creative results. That's what we've done with teams over and over again.
And we think right now what's interesting is with what's happening on a global level with this pandemic, suddenly crisis has forced us to have to find a different way to be together and get through this with all the differences across the globe, across leaders, across businesses, because if we don't learn how to collaborate and do this differently, it's going to be hard to emerge from this with all of us together. So it's pretty critical.
So we
certainly so.
Yeah.
Sure.
We just wanted to find a little bit about what makes you tick. And so what's your biggest challenge when it comes to conflict? And so this is where we'll launch a poll. Is it managing your own reactivity? You get upset, or is it worrying about dealing with somebody else's reactivity, or even knowing how this conflict impacts the business? What's your biggest challenge when it comes to conflict? Because what we'll do is, in hearing your results, it will help us tailor what we're going to talk about today and focus on the things that are most important.
And
everything.
Yes.
so while we're waiting for everyone to answer the poll, one of the things I'll say is that sometimes people can't see the poll. So if you can't see the poll, feel free to put your response into the chat. And then while we're waiting for people to answer, there was a question that came in, and one of our attendees is wondering why people don't like to face conflict and prefer to live with simple and complex problems. And that is a really big question.
Well,
we are going to address it, because we actually do think the real reason people are so uncomfortable with conflict actually lies somewhat in how we developed as younger beings, but also because we are so intolerant of uncertainty. And it is very hard conflict naturally will bring uncertainty. And if we don't have a pretty high capacity to tolerate it, which we don't learn very well in our culture in particular, and some cultures may be better, but that makes it really challenging.
And even the idea of, we learn, well, how much should I reveal? And what's going to happen when I do reveal it? Are they going to retaliate? Are they going to hurt me? And will I get fired? And we're factoring all that in. And typically we learn those skills, our tolerance, like Susan was saying, way back when. And so we have to actively work to develop that tolerance as adults to do it differently.
Got
Most
it. So
people tend to
I'm going to
want.
go ahead and close the poll and share those results. And as a host, I'm not able to vote, but these results closely reflect what I would have answered. So biggest challenge in conflict, 52% of us think the biggest challenge is worrying about the other person's reaction. You can count me in for that. That managing your own reactivity is 35%, and then knowing how the conflict impacts the business is 13%. And just a note here from Jessica, who says she worries about being perceived as the troublemaker or the argumentative person and it negatively impacting her career.
Yes.
Oh, well, tough. I can relate to that one. You know.
And that does happen in particular for women who have strong opinions. That can be the cultural norm, is to be perceived as aggressive and difficult. And so that, and learning how to actually say your piece in a way that people can hear it is a skill to be cultivated, which we help people do because we haven't had practice doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's what we need, is more practice with conflict.
Exactly.
Well, if you're going to get better at it.
And maybe, that's really it. We didn't call our book The Joy, the Comfort of Conflict, or
the ease
and grace of conflict. We named it The Beauty of Conflict for a particular reason, because beauty has depth and it has a richness. And sometimes we steer away from something because of what is the surface level discomfort of it. But if we could only hold it as something that is so much rich, like think about childbirth. That is not something that I think most women jump to go through that, but it is a beautiful, rich, and incredible experience. And if we could see that beauty in conflict, we might not have such the anxiety about getting into it. So,
and not expect for it to be easy. Expect and have it be okay that it's awkward and uncomfortable. You're not broken if that's how you feel when you bring something up. That's pretty darn normal. I really want to let you know that. And these are just some of the scenarios we see that conflict on team. The boss just doubled your workload and just says, get it all done, and you feel completely overwhelmed. Or your spouse isn't pulling their weight in the quarantine and the kids keep interrupting you.
You just got off a call and you broke down in tears because of something your coworker said to you. You're convinced that your boss is not treating everyone fairly. In fact, you're the one being signaled out.
Or you're so frustrated because everything seems to go into back channel politics. And by the way, that's because people aren't willing to deal with conflict directly. And that's a pain point. So, and I'd be curious if people have other scenarios, you can put them in the chat. And Becky, if you want to let us know as those collect, we'd love to hear what are your biggest pain points with conflict on teams. And we'll go on in the meantime. But we do think this conflict, this is what getting at, I forget who asked the question, but it's this, what is most uncomfortable is this uncertainty. I feel tense inside. What are you going to do? We don't know. And that's that same uncertainty in conflict, crisis, and change that happens.
And people want to know the right answer. We are inherently drawn to try to figure out what's right, what's certain, how can we get back to stability? And there is so much, and this is why we think this is so relevant right now. We're at a time where things cracked and fractured. We actually don't really want to go back to the normal, but that's probably more comfortable than trying to craft something new and different. And part of why that's so uncomfortable is because there's uncertainty.
And we didn't realize it, but when we wrote our book, we basically wrote a manual for how to deal with uncertainty. Yeah. So there's tons of tools in there because we were writing it for people dealing with conflict. And now it applies to our business situation, our relationships in general, and the state we're in right now. Mm-hmm. Any questions?
Well, we have a lot of comments here about pain points that people have with conflict on their teams, and I could take a moment to share those if this is a good time. All right, so it looks like here are a few of the areas of pain. So a challenge is to be authentic yet compassionate at the same time. A challenge is sabotage to a change process. Those unwilling to let me see, I lost my place here. Those unwilling to accept that there could be at least one other way to accomplish something. Teams who leave things unsaid just to avoid conflict. Managees who think they're being singled out. Let's see, what else? Team leader micromanaging and not giving space to be responsible. Dealing with a peer who isn't self-aware. Opening minds to other perspectives. articulating your position convincingly and listening to the views of others without taking offense. So
Oh.
lots of comments, different expectations from team members about how teams should function. I think you have a new list for your slide.
I love it.
We want to have those pain points.
Yes,
They're
those are
Yeah.
So-
Low levels of trust. People think their way's the only way.
well, I think we'll be addressing a
Many
number
of
of them, but we love the list because it is articulated differently. So this is perfect.
Now, we're just going to give you kind of a framework. We create a team, we join a team, a company, you know, smart people, passionate, focused on a goal, and we think we're going to change the world. That's our initial romance when we join something. What really happens is you have these smart, passionate people focused on a goal, and you have different opinions and then strong emotions. And then what happens is people get into right, wrong, and you have conflict. And that conflict is what's so uncomfortable. But we also think that conflict is a source of creative potential. It is actually pure potential energy.
Mm-hmm.
We are just not comfortable holding it. And so typically what we do is we avoid it, just what all those symptoms that you were saying. And when we avoid conflict, that's what creates factions, politics, people gossip rather than talking directly. There's confusion about what is it that we're doing. And we really get unproductive results, misery, and there's a lot of turnover because people don't feel good, you know.
And often what happens is these things happen over a period of time in which that conflict has been opted out. And it looks like one big issue is the problem, but really it's been a whole series of times when something has been avoided. And then it escalates into a crisis or conflict.
And when we avoid conflict, what happens is we typically find 3 typical styles of how people opt out of conflict. This might be a good place to tell a story about it.
So I'll give you a working example just so that you can stay with us. And so we've worked with one company. It's a large data computer company. And we had done various works with them over the years with their executive team. And we were getting called in to do our kind of regular strategic session with them. And Mike, who was the leader of this company, we always had a pre-call with him. And he was like, called us up like 2 days before, like, I got to change everything. We've got a major problem. And you might hear us say the word, oh shit. Because that's what we called it in our book, but he said, we have an oh shit moment on our team. And if I don't deal with it, we got to fix this because I got to deal with the board. And, we tried to talk him down, like, okay, just let's trust the process. Can you wait and let us do our thing for a little bit? And then he said, sure. So we show up for the offsite, and within 2 minutes, he did not wait. He was like, here, we got to have this meeting now. We got to do this. And so he said that there's a $500,000 error, run rate on the financials that I cannot explain. We agreed this would never happen, and it's happening. So we have to have this discussion now. And one of his people, Bob, spoke up and said, look, I know where that came from. I tried to get internal resources. I couldn't, so I hired consultants, and that's probably about the run rate. And right then, Meg, the other woman who was in charge of all of the main resources for the organization, said, look, you're throwing me under the bus, and there's no way you're going to blame me for some half-baked idea you had that wasn't really well vetted, and I wasn't about to put our primary resources on it. Now, you might think this was when the conflict started. The reality of it was, for the last 6 to 8 months, that conflict had been avoided.
Brewing under the surface.
And so now, because of these various opt-out styles.
And there's 3 opt-out styles. We're going to go into each one. The first one is the superstar. And the superstar really values action and results and focuses on their own agenda and tends to go into overdrive. Now, the superstar is, again, avoiding conflict and instead taking matters into their own hands and saying, you know what, I'm going to do this, and the team's going to thank me in the end because I'm going to do such great work.
And with this particular company, that would be Bob, who was handling the situation by hiring consultants because he just was told to get the job done.
Now, the second style is the accommodator, one of my personal favorites. And they value harmony and relationships. They're the ones that want to keep things smooth. And so they focus on pleasing the other person. And they often give in, like, okay, your way. And what they really miss is bringing themselves to the equation. And so the team misses their own input because they're usually going around one-on-one, like, well, Bob, I think it's this way. I can really agree with you. And Mike, I really agree with you. So it's kind of like, or Peg, they work the back channels one-on-one because that feels safer to them.
And in the case of this company, that would actually be the CEO, Mike, who had, at some point in time, he knew these two had issues. He had never really said how important it was that they work together. So he kept kind of doing things one-off with each of them. And he actually recognized that at some point. And that was actually a key moment when he recognized his opt-out style. So.
And the last one these are typical ones, there could be others, but this is what we see most people do, is the separator. The separator is the one in the meeting, they're like, I'm just going to check my email while you two work it out and we can get back to real, let me know when we can get back to the real work. And they really value clarity and calm. And so they'll just going to disengage and focus on a different problem. And they can be dismissive, even though really they're uncomfortable with what's going on.
And in case you also may need to know about the separator, is the difference between the separator, say, and Mike, is the separator would also say, you two work that offline.
Yeah, you two
and
take that offline.
You take that offline. And it can sound like a great leadership role, not really. And the separator in this case, though, was actually Meg. And she was like, hey, she was actually focused on the bread and butter of the business, but she wasn't about to kind of redistribute those resources until she had some clarity that it was actually going to be a successful project. And so, I mean, the key thing you need to know about these three opt-out styles is they can also be superpowers. So, but on a team, when you need to work collectively together, they can get in the way.
They undermine that potential energy because it's like taking a balloon that has all this potential energy and all the air goes out of it. So we want to hear from you. When you're uncomfortable in conflict, do you tend to be a superstar, an accommodator, or a separator? And so this is another poll, if you'll launch that, Becky.
Yes, I have launched it.
Excellent. Cool.
And if for some reason, again, you can't see the poll, we would welcome you to share your conflict avoidance style in the chat. And I met with CrisMarie and Susan on Monday, and we were talking through these. And Cheryl, like you, I think that most times I'm an accommodator, but CrisMarie and Susan thought perhaps I would usually show up as a superstar. I can see both of those, actually. And, maybe that's the case, CrisMarie and Susan, that we might switch depending on the type of conflict that we're facing or maybe the type of environment we're in. Mary is commenting that it's hard to pick one. It seems like I can be another.
Yes.
The thing about it is, when CrisMarie, some of us develop a superpower. Like, I think,
growing up with the Colonel, my dad, I was definitely an accommodator.
And if it worked, you might actually think to some degree, this is the way to go. And then other people, they may kind of squirt between these and depending on, maybe at home, you're more of the superstar, or at work, you're more of the accommodator, or on one team, you're this way. And so you can have variations on the theme.
Yeah.
Well,
sure.
Let's take a look at these results. It looks like many of you have had the chance to vote. And look at those results.
Okay. All right.
Accommodators. Okay, my people. And
superstars are close second. I think there's
and a few
some separators. I actually think one of the things that happens fairly regularly with us is people do not identify with the separator. And having worked with tons of teams, I think there's a lot of disownership of that separator.
They separate from their separator.
They separate from their separator. So.
Well, I love the honest comment from someone who just typed it to the panelists, so I won't shout out the name, that he's more of a superstar and it gets him into trouble with his wife all the time. So that's a really interesting comment because everything that we're learning about conflict and how it helps or can change things in the workplace can also be applied to those at-home relationships.
Absolutely. When we work with the leadership teams, we usually do a 2-day offsite. Now we're doing them virtually. But often people are like, wow, I use that, we're going to get to it, the check it out model with my wife, and it really helped. Or
they talk about this at home, it's one way, and at work, it's another. And now, this is, again, this whole situation with this pandemic is the personal and the business just got thrown in together no matter what. You may have been trying to separate the two forever, but if you're stuck at home, sheltering in place, you are now dealing with a home team, a work team, all sorts of stuff that is bringing these same dynamics forward.
Yeah,
So
that's great. Okay. So what we want to do, so that's how we typically, what we want, we hope our voices are in your head saying, when the next time you're in a conflict, ooh, what is my opt-out style? What am I doing? To become aware of how you typically diffuse the energy of conflict in a not necessarily a productive way. And now we want to tell you how to respond and opt in.
And just to make it clear, I think a lot of times people believe that reacting is bad and responding is good.
Mm-hmm.
And we get into this, and that's actually, to me, one of the fundamental problems we have with conflict is that we, there's a time and a place to react and respond. And the key is the choice and understanding and being curious, because the minute we make ourselves wrong for our reaction, we are less likely to own it, become aware of it, and consider what is the best choice.
And be able to make a different choice. We get stuck when we're, make ourselves wrong. So there's 3 typical areas that we want to focus in, and we work with when we coach leaders, coach individuals, coach teams, we focus on all 3 areas. And one is what's going on inside of me, what's happening in our relationship, and then what's the business context that's happening. And all 3 of those are equally important. And we just want to give a picture of here's the me axis, the we axis is another way to look at it. And then the context of our business that's happening, our business health. All 3 of those are equally important. We tend to make one more important than the other. But with what's happened more recently, our context is completely shattered, which rocks what's happening inside and also rocks our relationships. And we're grabbing on for stability anywhere we can.
And we actually think the strongest levers right now might come with this internal place of awareness and ability to function and work from your me axis, your relational ability to collaborate and do things differently, and that is going to be what will potentially stabilize the context, maybe not just of one business, but of multiple businesses, and seeing things from a much more collaborative process.
So we're going to dive.
That's really helpful. So that, and this also kind of maps to the poll that we did at the beginning when you were asking people to comment on what they're concerned about when they face conflict. Some of us said, I'm concerned about how I react. Some of us said, I'm concerned about how the other person's going to react. And then others said, I'm concerned about what's happening in the business. So that kind of maps back, right, to the first poll.
Yeah, and anytime we work with, coach somebody individually or coach a team, we're always looking at what's happening inside your relationships and your business context, because they're all part of what we're doing. So they're all valuable. And one usually has a bigger lever for some individuals.
Yeah.
And we'll give you some tools for the me. We're going to dive into that one first. We hope we get to all 3. And this is what happens in conflicts, as people were wondering why it's so uncomfortable, is as tension and uncertainty arise in conflict, we go up on this stress curve, the level of intensity, and we go into our fight, flight, and freeze brain, which one narrows our focus and diminishes our brain, and we feel more reactive and less in control. We have that level of uncertainty, and it's very uncomfortable. And what's happening is your brain has been hijacked. It's called the amygdala hijack. This is an ancient part of our brain, that orange almond shaped. And it has 2 settings, on and off, bear, no bear. And what happens right now, we have a lot of bear, like all the different changes. And that puts us into those stress responses. And that floods our body with cortisol, adrenaline, and it really limits how well we can respond. And that's often when we're having these crucial conversations and trying to make decisions from that stressed out space. And we believe actually learning in crisis, conflict, and change, how to deal with that level of uncertainty and support yourself is the #1 skill we can support you with.
And so we believe that there's 2 things that are important to pay attention to here. Like as we're go into that stress point, or even right now with the current crisis, we tend to we've even been asked in this current situation to control ourselves, go inside, lock down, shelter in place, follow the rules, don't do that, don't do this. And in business, we're often following very clear, stable processes and procedures that have been put in place to help us be successful. And actually, frankly, we learn often in our culture we need to get the right answer. We need to get control of ourselves and the world around us There's a certain rigidity that we adapt. And I think in particularly in our culture, we tend to value doing more than anything else. Go to action really quickly. And as a result, sometimes we end up objectifying ourselves and others. And we get very identified with our role, whether it's our role, really it could be our role at work or at home. And often in that, there becomes a victim and blame. We tend to think us and them, and we tend to make right and wrong. And it's a very narrow focus.
When I'm an Olympic athlete. I was in the 1988 Olympics as a rower. And when I was training 6 months before the games, I was definitely in a fixed mindset because my back kind of started bugging me, and the physical therapist said, hey, I think you should take a few days off. And I was mad at my body because I was treating it like a tool. And my coach said, hey, she's either in the boat every day or she's not in the boat at all. So I was like, okay, I'll get in the boat. And I got in the boat, rowed, and hurt my back more. And so then I was off the water. I couldn't row at all. And oh my gosh, I was so mad at my body. I felt like a victim because my coach made me get in the boat. So I was blaming him, feeling like a victim. And it felt like my whole life was slipping through my fingers. And I was very rigid. And this lasted not 1 month, not 2 months, but 3 months before. So I'm 3 months now before the Olympic Games. And I went into my physical therapist's office. And at that point, I was close to suicide. And she could tell I had this dark cloud over my head. And she said, listen, we're doing a lot to fix your body, but friend, you've got to do something to fix your head. And in that, I realized, I went and talked to a different coach, different person. And I had been blaming my coach for me getting in that boat. And when I realized, hey, I made the choice to get in that boat because I wanted to go to the Olympics. That was the choice, and I made it. It was like I took back all this power. And what I realized is, hey, I'm going to go for it. It's my choice. If my body gets hurt, I'll take care of it. And once I own that, my whole energy shifted, and I was able to make the Olympic 8, and we went to Seoul, Korea. But that wouldn't have happened had I not flipped out of that fixed mindset to something different.
So we tend to want to use our defenses to compensate for and cover up for our own uncertainty, like what we don't know. And we desperately attempt to get control of ourselves, the situation, and other people. And that's usually a very survival-oriented mode. And a lot of times, especially by the time we're leaders in business and in our adult lives, we don't realize those defenses become very sophisticated. And they really do look like, I really do have the right answer. I really am. And I don't know how many people I've talked to in the last few weeks that are like, no, I'm not having any anxiety. I'm doing just fine. And then, within a few minutes, it's like, whoa, I get it. There's a lot more happening here than I thought. Mm-hmm. So,
and there's another approach, and we think it's more empowering, and it's more adaptive and flexible, and will help you actually respond to the situation and grow, be more creative and resilient, and take back your power from this uncertain situation.
And we refer to this as more the growth mindset. And the first word tells it all. It's about vulnerability. And frankly, that's a word that, thank goodness for Brené Brown. She's giving it some great opportunities for it to thrive and become a part of our world. It's so vital, and people see it as a weakness, but it takes tremendous courage to be vulnerable and expose yourself, to take an emotional risk. It also means not looking at things so black and white. To me, it's a big difference between being a leader and being in leadership. Leadership requires looking at the subtleties, not finding just the right answer. It requires flexibility, a beingness. Sometimes you just have to wait. And that we are not very good at that. Be patient. Sit in your house right now.
But when you actually connect to that beingness, you can connect to that reflective. You access more of your brain power. You're not in this narrow focus.
To be more personal and authentic, self-responsible, knowing that you can respond and have responded, and then you have a wider focus. Now, the key here, and this is what I think tends to happen, is people are like, okay, I want to be an authentic leader. And it's like, it's not about one or the other. It really is about the movement.
And the noticing of where you are.
Because there is a time and a place. Like right now, we probably do need to practice social distancing, being in control, put on our mask, do our thing, and that's very fixed and controlled. There's a good place for it. As a leader, sometimes you have to make decisions where you cannot you need to be in that role and you don't demonstrate as much personal, authentic, but then you need to be able to shift. So it's actually the movement that is critical here.
And the keys that we find that help when you're in a fix to move to a growth is actually to breathe and drop into your feelings and share from a place of what's really going on. That doesn't mean you have to share everything, but letting people know, hey, this is what's going on. I'm actually sad about this, or I'm really frustrated. This isn't working for me. And then we're going to talk about checking out your story and being curious with the other person. And if you ever want to go from, you feel like I'm in too much of a growth, I want to go back to a fixed mindset, just stop breathing and take charge.
Yeah.
So it's not about one is good or bad. Knowing when to flex and move is what's so powerful. So I'm just going to check in, Becky.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, when we were preparing for this event and talking through this idea, I've heard people talk about the growth mindset before, and I've heard them talk about it more in this black and white way, like growth mindset is good and fixed mindset is bad. And I don't know if you want to go back to that slide, but I think it's really powerful to consider this idea that we have to be able to switch back and forth, that we need both. In some of these cases, I don't think we need victim and blame. We always need self-responsibility. But as it relates to being and doing, or control or vulnerability, there are places that we will need to use that fixed mindset, and that's freeing in some ways.
Yeah. Well, I think about even the victim and blame. That's probably one of the hardest ones on this continuum for people to get. However, there is a time when a person who has felt like a victim needs to stand up and say, they need to speak that. And there are times, when, that is an important part that sometimes we don't like to look at, and I know me, I hate it when I go to my victim place, but there's a part of me that's like, by pretending I don't have it, I'm also not being very like, well, I do feel like a victim right now. And the minute that I can drop and really
acknowledge it.
Yeah. And own it. It's like all those feelings come up. And then that's actually what helps me to be able to make a choice. Over. So,
it really is owning that. And I think Esther Perel did a podcast on the power of complaining. And especially right now, giving yourself a space to, I just feel frustrated and I don't feel like anything's working. It is the power that moves the energy for you to then take responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
So there are a couple of questions on this topic that I'll bring forth. So one question is, how is fixed mindset good for a leader? And I'll read the other one and maybe you can answer both at the same time. The second question is fixed mindset thinking the answers, and growth mindset is being open to new and divergent ideas?
Mm-hmm. So the first one, I'll give you a simple example. Like a fixed mindset is a dentist. I'm going to use a dentist or a surgeon that knows exactly what they need to do when they go in there. They are in their role. They know how to put you to sleep. There's no question about it. You put these are the steps. It's very clear. You want your surgeon in a fixed mindset when they do it. You don't want them necessarily in a growth mindset. And doesn't mean that maybe in the midst of that surgery, some bizarre thing happens and they may flip, but there's a good place and time for fixed.
Even the military is a very fixed process. There's black and white rules, things. They do treat the soldiers like objects in a lot of ways. They're tools. That's part of getting something done. So giving measurement and structure and black and white.
And knowing sometimes as a leader, you have to be in a role because that's not the time and the place. Like in a crisis, sometimes it is very helpful for someone to be clear and know, this is what I'm going to ask you to do. Like I think of right now, there's so many people who are in some roles, like I think of our governor here in Montana, who's being asked to give some pretty clear directives. And they need to have that kind of, this is what we're going to ask you to do, that kind of clarity. Now, the other question was
different minds, where growth mindset is about actually collaborating, hearing the different points of view, being able to kind of wrestle with them. I think that was the thrust of the last question. Is that right?
Yes, and I have a comment too that I wonder if you could speak to, since it's all related to this slide. Carol is wondering, she says, I get this empowered approach as an individual, but it sounds tough for teams, especially multicultural ones. So any thoughts about that?
Well, actually, this is a great time. This is a very humanizing time right now. And we have been working with teams to actually have them check in about how they have been going through this, which breaks down all these barriers, and we see the humanness in each other. And it really drives the connection, because it's the connection between people, and then working to figure out what is it that we want to do, what matters most right now.
And can you read that one more time? Because I think she was saying.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, she said, I get this empowered approach as an individual, but it sounds tough for teams, especially multicultural ones.
I think one of the things I appreciate about, I think she's saying, is we are in so much, but prior to COVID, and COVID is bringing up all sorts of other things, but this desire to have inclusivity, diversity, things like that, make sure. And one thing that can happen is, because we're sort of saying we want to have, make it safe, do these things, in some respect, that actually starts to create a fixed mindset about when and how you're going to have those conversations.
Like politically correct.
And it actually shuts down the conversation. So this is why it's such a dance. And it really does take a strong person who can hold their own potential to go to a right wrong and recognize it when they do it, to create the space for a team to be able to navigate it, because you're going to go into that fixed place. You're going to go into where there's a right wrong, and you're going to have to come back out of it. And so it really is that movement. That's why it's so critical right now.
I mean, I think that's what we coach leaders to do with their teams is, one, recognize when they're in a fixed mindset and open it up for dialogue. And then they also have to close it down and make a decision. And sometimes that is a leader's call, which is, again, I'm going to make the choice, and it's going to be this.
And honestly, I think right now we have a culture that wants to make dialogue safe. The reality of it is, safety is a mental construct. It's going to be messy, and there is no way to make it perfectly safe. The best you can do is try to walk that line and be willing to recognize we went over the line here. Now we need to pull it back and figure out, we're in a mess. How are we going to clean it up?
And even in our coaching, it's helping you develop the sense that there's safety inside of you. Yeah. So you can tolerate the tension of speaking up, and then working with the team so they start to develop the capacity for that tension. And we give real-time permission. We know this is uncomfortable right now in the team setting. It makes perfect sense. This is awkward. And this is really getting to you what you want to get to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hope that helped.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. Carol followed up to say that she thinks you have to know your team members well and recognize their strengths and weakness. And then Jessica's commenting that safety inside of you is a great concept, because we can't control anything outside of us. We can't guarantee that there's safety outside of us.
If that's what this is teaching me, and what I'm coaching on is actually that cultivation of internal safety, because everything is being rocked. And one of the ways we work with teams is actually helping them get to know each other by sharing like styles and personal history and things that actually normalize and connect the team.
Yeah, one of the most powerful exercises to do is to actually have people on a team talk about what they learned about conflict. What do they want? And having teams come up with the rules are the way they're going to play together in conflict, instead of this broad scoped, here's what you're supposed to do in conflict. But to have that dialogue and make sure that people are engaging in it for themselves, and make space for that the best you can.
And that's what we do when we work with teams, is help them develop those norms, have that conversation, and figure out their rules of engagement, so to speak.
That's really helpful.
Cool. And this is all the things that we do when we are coaching, the mindset work, even dealing with emotional regulation, because that's a skill we have not learned, and movement, and working with the body, and mindfulness to cultivate that safety, so that you have you feel you are able to take more risk and speak up more honestly in a way that feels heard, and knowing that you can take care of yourself. You don't need to make the world safe so that you're safe.
Yeah, that's really powerful.
So now we'll go on to some tools for having these conversations, unless there's any other comments that you want to chime in or questions.
I think we're good for now. There's some conversations going back and forth, and I love seeing that.
Yes.
Okay. So what conflict there's more conflict that's happening as we're coming out of sheltering in place, because we were in a fixed mindset. These are the rules. And now it's like, well, when do we, and how? I don't agree. And I don't want to come to the office. All these things bring more conflict to the surface. And so we want you to think of a time that you have experienced distress in a relationship setting. Some of those situations we talked about, we want you just to bring a specific situation for your own, so you can work it through in your mind. So just take a moment to do that right now.
So do we want people to put that in the chat, or, you know, if they'd like to?
Yeah,
and
that'd be
if
great.
you're not comfortable doing it in chat, if you just have a piece of paper, that's fine too. You know, we love it in the chat, but
Okay.
Yeah.
you know.
Just, and it could be situations where you felt shut down because somebody didn't like your idea, or so any sort of distress in a conversation, and even if you were, with a coworker.
Got it. So I don't see any in the chat yet, but hopefully all of you are identifying some times that you've experienced distress in a work relationship.
And hopefully more recently, because there's so much happening.
Yes.
And a lot of times when we're coaching, we'll say, well, have you had the conversation with it? This is actually what we were chatting with even you, Becky, a little bit, you know, like, have you had the conversation? And a lot of times when somebody has a situation that they're frustrated with or having a hard time, they think, well, why bother? I know what they're going to say, or I just don't want to rock the boat. It's too tense right now, or I've tried and they didn't listen, or they don't care about me. Why should I say anything? And I don't know if other people, if there's any comments of situations, or why don't you have the conversation with the person involved?
When you think of that situation you just came up with, what's the reason you give yourself to not have the conversation even again? Maybe you had it once, it didn't go well.
Yeah. Anything?
I'm not seeing anything yet.
Don't be shy, people. Don't be shy.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you can relate to these. I know these are ones we hear.
I know I have said, oh, I don't want to, she doesn't care about me. I'm not going to say it. You know, I've taken myself
yours
out.
probably comes across more. She doesn't care about the business. Much
Well,
less
when I
me.
did.
Yeah.
You know, that happens on Teams.
Yeah.
Lots of comments now. I've tried and they didn't listen. You might feel it's a lost cause. Being accused of stealing an idea. That type of dialogue isn't welcome in my situation. An idea has been shot down before, so I shut down because I think it's not worth the risk to share how I feel. My opinion doesn't matter. My comments might make them think I'm too woo-woo and not focused on the business, too much pride. Like, just forget it. I know what you're going to say.
Okay, so
Good.
Definitely along these
Good.
lines.
All right, thank you.
And this is probably the biggest skill that Susan actually coached me to develop, is even if I think all these things, there is a reason to speak up.
Because if nothing changed, if even, like, a lot of times people don't want to do it because they don't think they're going to be heard. It's not going to make any difference. But the reality of it is, if you just find a way to bring your voice into the mix, what it really does is it gives you back your power. It brings you into clarity and alignment. And I've seen this so many times where, you know, that has been the most important piece. And you'd be surprised if you don't speak up, you end up feeling that resentment and like a victim to the situation.
That's where you go back into that fixed mindset, and it's very painful for you. So again, even if nothing changes, if you can find a way to vocalize, you will feel more of that sense of wholeness. And that's what I have learned over these last years, for sure.
Yeah, that's really powerful. So you may be doing it for others, but really you're doing it for yourself.
I mean, I can remember, I mean, this is a long time ago. This is when I used to play basketball in college, and I was a scholarship basketball player. And we had this event occur where I did something. I'm a point guard. So I was bringing the ball down the court. There had never been a woman who had dunked a basketball before.
This
so
is a long time ago.
This is a long time ago. I'm showing my age. And I'm bringing and we had practiced this. And so we were losing by 30 points. We were losing to Old Dominion at the time, the best team in the country. And so I put up a pass, and this woman who could jump, she went all the way up. She went over the rim. And the ball hit the back of the rim and didn't go through. But it was huge. And my coach,
the crowd went wild.
I'm guessing you weren't there, CrisMarie.
I know. The coach yanked us.
You can feel it.
Yanked us off the team, yanked us off the court. She actually threw her off the team altogether without question. She could not come back.
Because this woman, the coach didn't want them dunking.
Yes, she had made, in her mind, this was not to be the thing. And so I made a decision that if you're throwing her off the team, I'm going to go off the team. And was very clear. I had the conversation with the coach. Now and the reality, I got kicked off the team. I lost my scholarship. You would think that would be the most disastrous thing that could ever happen to me. And yet it was probably one of the most empowering moments for me. I was so crystal clear. I have no regrets about it. So it doesn't mean you're always going to get your way. Let's just be clear, but it does alter the course of your life in terms of the ability to speak up. And sometimes you don't get what you want, but you get what you need. That's a great
sure. Well, it sounds like it gave you a chance, Susan, to solidify your values and become more clear about who you were and who you wanted to become.
Exactly. And maybe I would have become a great WNBA basketball player. Doubtful. Not really. That's not really my skill set.
Well, and I've done it where I've been working with a client and I was just miserable and getting jerked around, and finally I thought I had to keep taking it, and then Susan said, why don't you speak up? And I did speak up, and I said, you know what, I don't think we're right for each other, you need to move on. And then they were like, wait, please, we'll do it your way. And so it's amazing. You don't know how it's going to respond, but if you do it for you and you can own the outcome, whatever that is, getting kicked off or having them shift things around, you're going to feel so much more whole.
Mm-hmm. So
yeah, that is very powerful.
Yeah. Okay. Just any comments or questions?
There are tons of comments, and they're moving so fast that it's hard to give them all attention, but I appreciate, people commenting. I do have one. So Roberta says she recently had that experience. She didn't get the resolution she wanted, but when she hung up the phone, she thought, okay, I know where I stand, and this person is not going to see things differently, but she still felt a sense of closure.
Yeah.
And there's a question here. I don't know if this is a good time to take it, but I'll throw it out just in case. So Mona is curious to hear how you understand and explore issues of social identity, so gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, sexual identity, age, generation in your work around conflict. How do you understand and explore those?
We're going to dive into that now, I think. So hopefully this will take you to how we would work with that.
Okay, perfect.
One is having the courage to speak up, and it requires two ingredients, vulnerability and curiosity. And vulnerability is that willingness to risk saying what really is true for you. And again, it's not everything, but it's finding the key pieces that you do need to share about what you really think, feel, and want. And on this spectrum, you can stay a lot hidden, or you can actually show up more real, and that's a continuum.
The key here is that sometimes this is very tricky to navigate. And so in certain cases, like around race, around gender, around, I think sometimes what is so hard for people these days is, myself sometimes, to own my privilege, to say, this is what it looks like. This is how it feels. This is what's going on for me. And yet, without that vulnerability, we're not going to get anywhere. So keep going. All right,
we're in time too.
So the second part of this is curiosity. And the irony about curiosity is that a lot of times I hear people say, I don't want to be judgmental. And I'm like, you were actually hired to be judgmental, to have an opinion, that's your subject matter expert. Don't shy away from that. That's not the problem. The problem is we have an opinion and we think we're right. And we've actually attached righteousness to our perspective. And that is really where the problem lies, even around talking about race, gender, all those things. If we could have an opinion about it and then be curious, that's going to open a different door.
So this curiosity, am I closed to input, even if I have an opinion, or am I more open to it? And just to show you that these are where the opt-out styles show up. And the superstar knows their opinion, but isn't very open to other people. A separator is kind of closed to other people and even themselves. They're just focusing on something else. An accommodator is very interested in other people, but doesn't bring themselves forward. forward. The influencer is really willing to show up and say, this is what I think, and I'm equally open to your opinion here.
And in some of our most heated, controversial issues, whether it be around race, whether it be around politics, whether it be around gender, around these, you still have to have people show up, even in their worst of extremes, to get that dialogue out on the table. And that is what sometimes we miss.
We say it's not what you do, it's what you do next. So even if I say something that somebody takes big offense to, if I can actually be open and interested to like, wow, tell me what happened, then we, obviously I did something that I put my foot in my mouth, but help me understand that. That builds a bridge versus trying to learn all the rules about what not to say.
And then you don't have the conversation.
Then we're not actually really connected.
Sorry. I was going to say what occurs to me about this is that the only way to have true influence or to make a positive impact on resolving the conflict is to be both open and curious.
Yes.
That's the key.
And the irony is, I know you want going in to have a positive conflict and you might make a mess. So if you're just willing to make a mess and pay attention, you can, it's not what you do, it's what you do next. Pay attention, because you can take your foot out of your mouth if you notice you put it in. Yeah. So it's like that, and most of us don't notice because we're so busy trying to do it right. And it's like, okay.
And another phrase we say is, do you want to be relational or do you want to be right? Yeah. And relational, I'm willing to actually show up and get messy, and be interested in the impact it's having on you and hang in. That's that hanging in.
I think you should go to the one after this, because this is something we talk, why this is important is this is how we believe we take in information, and it's a whole process. We could spend years talking about this.
This is all outlined in the book. We take in data and it all goes through our personal filter, which deletes, distorts, generalizes information. So that's all those biases, the gender, all the different things.
Everything.
And it out pops a story, and we call it a story. We think people think they're right, but it's really just a story. And that creates what we feel, and it drives our intention. And we talk about how to check it out, how to check out your story, not assume you're right. Because all we see on the outside of people is what they say and do. So one is building a bridge to how you process information, but also then building a bridge to how another person.
Because someone who, I think in the earlier part, who feels like they are dealing more with their own reactivity, I think, like for myself as a highly reactive person, I had to really learn, how did I put this together? How did I go through all of these and really get an understanding of my own personal filter, where it came from? And that was really how I learned to develop the skill of choice in my own reactivity. So.
And one of the questions we suggest, we call it a magic question, when you're in loggerheads with somebody, and is to ask them, why is this so important to you? To really get at, and what you start to unearth is what's driving their value system, how they put the world together. And that can be a real bridge builder.
And right now, like, there's so many ways in which I am having to find myself go to this question, because I see somebody doing something that's like, what? You're not socially distancing, you're out on the, what? And I could get into my righteousness, or I can explore, why might that be so important to them? And why is it so important to me? Like, it just helps me to kind of expand my horizon, to have more tolerance for what might be going on.
Now we have a whole nother section, but we don't have time to do that. So I was thinking, how should we stop?
Yeah, so we may need to jump to the call to action slides at the very end of your deck if you can get to them easily. And we want to tell you how you can learn more from CrisMarie and Susan. So let's see.
I did not put the call to action slides in my deck.
You didn't. So one way that you can continue to learn from CrisMarie and Susan is to check out their podcast. Can you go back to the slide before this one? It is called The Beauty of Conflict Podcast. Another thing you could do is buy one or both of CrisMarie and Susan's books. I have both of them. They were kind and generous and sent them to me. So The Beauty of Conflict for teams, The Beauty of Conflict for couples, two very colorful books. You can visit CrisMarie and Susan's website to find out about the services that they offer to organizations, the individual coaching, the individual like programs, all of those things. You can call CrisMarie and Susan on the phone. So I'm still not sure. I have someone in my phone. I never assigned a name to the contact. So I don't know when I text you guys, which of you I'm texting. I need to sort all that out. But it looks like you can actually call CrisMarie and Susan on the phone to talk about virtual and live speaking, team building coaching, and leadership development, or you can email them thrive@thriveinc.com. And Anita says that we need to get you back to share the rest of the presentation.
I know. And you know, we will also send out if this works, to send out like a little workbook, how to have tough conversations. It's like a 15-page. It'll help you prepare to have a conversation. It'll give you some of these same concepts. So we're happy to do that as well.
Yes.
Got it. Well, thank you for choosing to invest an hour of your time with us today. I hope that you have something powerful that you can take away and implement even today. And for me, the thing that's top of mind is that magic question, why is this so important to you? So we look forward to continued interaction, and we will be in touch with follow-up resources, including a PDF of the slides, a link to the recording, so you can invite others to learn and grow. So before we wrap, CrisMarie and Susan, I'm going to let you have the final word and send us off with some inspiration or encouragement for dealing with conflict, either personally or on our teams.
I just have to say, my marketing person, Becky's going to give me, since I didn't have our call to action slides. But as far as, I would just really, my piece about conflict is I always minimized my own voice and thought, you know, it's better just to stay safe and not speak up. And my life has categorically changed for the better. And I've gotten so much more fulfillment as I have learned to show up and speak up and ask for what I want in more and more relationships. I mean, it's transformed my life and my fulfillment. So I want to give you a plug to do that.
And the piece that I would add for that, and this just has to do with where we are right now in the world, is this is a time not to be a leader, but to be in leadership and leading. And what that means to me is expanding beyond whether you don't, leading means going in with whatever you have to offer and offering it and collaborating, and very different than just being the leader who has the right answer. So if there's any time and a place to tolerate uncertainty and lead, work through that type of leadership, please engage in that. Conflict will help you.